to Diesel Bookstore. All of you, this is a wonderful crowd. First, I'm going to say a few words, a bookseller's feelings about Riley Perez's book. If you've been reading, as I have, about prison conditions in California and thinking, oh, we've got to do something about this. After you read his book, you'll want to act as I do. So I've had an education here about what goes on in our prisons. But on the other hand, I want to tell you that this is also a book about a man's redemption, you might say, and who is in fact an articulate, athletic, very bright, really wonderful person. Now, when I say articulate, I have to tell you that he threw me with a word that I spent some time looking up and couldn't find the definition. So I'm going to make him tell us what peregrine means. And it's just not in any dictionary I looked at. Now, for all the ugliness and the, let's say, sneaky stuff that Riley has done, he won me over on the first page before I even started the book, because he's so sweet. He chose as his title a line from the Velveteen Rabbit. How could you not love a man who did that? All right, so Peter Conti is going to moderate tonight, and I think you should know that he is a writing professor at Columbia University, and he's written the book Ringo, which is a bestseller. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Peter Conti.
Thank you all for coming. Great crowd. I met Riley about 2 years ago. A friend of mine introduced him just as my book dropped. And he said, why don't you talk to this guy? Maybe you can help him out. It's the last thing I wanted to do, right? The last thing I wanted to do was read a book about prison. I've done my own research, and it's not fun. So I figured, what am I going to learn from this book? And what am I going to learn from this guy? I'm going to hear how he wasn't guilty, everybody else was wrong, he didn't deserve to go to prison, and he's going to need all kinds of help. But I did it. He pulled up in a new Mercedes. I noticed he had a Rolex watch on. I had a Fitbit on. And gets out of the car, and I'm like, how am I going to help this guy? He looks like he doesn't need any help. And I have to say, I haven't helped him, because he came out with such tenacity, and he wrote a book that doesn't make any apologies and certainly doesn't mince words. It's not a cartoon. It's more, I think, like a psychological and sociological portrait of what life is like in prison. And he's one of the few men that I know that did his time, came out, and really has changed his life in the last 4 years. And I'm very proud of him. He's going to read some of his book, then he's going to take questions and answers. Introduce my friend, Riley Perez.
Once upon a time, once upon a midnight dreary, Edgar Allan Poe. Once upon a midnight dreary, Edgar Allan Poe. He will wait.
I'm so sorry. In all test rehearsals it went well.
Testing. I sat alone, confined to a disagreeably damp holding cell. The officers traversed the hall, their boots and keys clanking with musical synchronicity. I thought that I would finally have a moment to question my thoughts, but the slamming of cell doors and the constant echoing of names being summoned never let up. There was a pattern building with the accused as they got rushed from the holding cells into wood panel courtrooms, then off to staging areas, back down dirt-stained hallways, then quiet. Loneliness is a shifting concept. I was alone in my journey, but never actually left to myself for more than 5 minutes. My new companion, an ash-ridden man, entered the holding cell carried by knobby knees that nearly buckled beneath his skeletal frame as he made his way to an open bench. The ashy man slapped and shook as I looked on. 10 minutes elapsed before the ashy man found the strength to stand. He stood on shaky legs and for the first time acknowledged that I was sharing space with him. Not forgetting his character as a feeble jail addict, he resumed his shaking. I offered him the apple I had left from the cruel excuse of a meal they'd left earlier, and the addict stopped shaking long enough to say, "No thanks, I'm kicking heroin." I looked on as the shaking resumed. The dingy blue LA County Jail jumpsuit engulfed his body like he were in his eternal coffin. "I'm tired of this shit, this life." And so began his confessions. I nodded every 20 words to act interested, my fear being that if he started slicing at his arms with a razor, there would be no way for me to explain this to the authorities. He carried on with his story, and I was relieved that he didn't have the courage to end his life. He would make his confession stretching back for over 40 years of slamming junk. He talked, and I nodded every 20 words to act interested. I was saved by a visit from my attorney, Ron Richards. He had little room for dancing around the severity of what I was facing, so in order of the charges in the indictment, he rambled on at warp speed. I heard little of what he said until, "You are facing 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole." I was aware of the charges, but hearing them repeated caused my legs to go numb. I pondered the heroin route the old man had told me about. Maybe I could end it all. And then I remembered that I detest needles, and I am a fuck up, and would probably air the shot and be a vegetable forever. Returning from the self-induced horror film that I was directing in my mind, I heard Ron repeat the severity of the charges. The words individually are benign, but once arranged in the sentence, the events the words describe become ghoulish. A humming buzz seized my mind, and the last parts of his monologue settled in, and before I could ask a question, he was gone. My ashy companion started a conversation to fill the dead air. In his deliberate, measured tone, the confessions poured out of how he began his affair with heroin. The caesurists in his speech were maddening, as if for the first time he were relieving himself of the burden of his experiences. All the overdoses he came close to not returning from, the missed opportunities. I asked, what was too much? He didn't answer. His head shook in disagreement with what he knew I was asking of him. The fright of being in a hell that I can't end with suicide seized my thoughts. How terribly depressing it would be if the system removed suicide as an option. Before I could adjust to the new feeling of despair, in walked a young Hispanic man. He walked in a mummy stutter step. He sat and said nothing. I said nothing in return. Minutes passed and several officers came to retrieve the kid, shackling him at his legs and wrists and connecting the chains to his waist. No one spoke. The kid complied without incident, clearly practiced at this ritual. Then, in a whisper that was positively menacing, He said, "They're going to kill me. I have life." He repeated the word life, the vacant look remaining in his stare. He was stuck on the word, not talking to anyone in particular, but saying it as if he had just heard it for the first time. His escorts extracted him from the cell, and he continued with his study of the word life. With each step, his youthful appearance became hardened. Whatever he meant by, "They're going to kill me," was the end of everything he's got and everything he'll never have. I possibly just witnessed a kid who may never have the luxury of being with a woman. Why was he about to die, and who was going to kill him? The most pitiful thing in the world is a mob. They don't fight with the courage they're born with. They fight with the courage borrowed from their numbers. Mark Twain, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Playtime, Chapter 3. I saw a familiar face as the yard continued to fill beyond its intended capacity. I remembered that he was affiliated with the Bloods. I knew that he held a respectable rank in his fraternity, so I reasoned having an association with him could be beneficial to me. Snoop was his name. Calling him would draw the attention of the officers, so instead, I decided to wave his attention to me. His broad African face was what you would expect to see of a tribesman from the Congo. It was a face with a strong forehead and a thick nose that had been mashed flat. As he approached, I could see his eyes darting from my hands to my face. He maintained awareness of the yard as he walked towards me, stepping with an effortless swing, never allowing his true emotions to be betrayed. I was relieved that he'd recognized me, and without a pause and flow, we greeted with a standard fist bump and a half-hearted hug. Snoop and I had exchanged stories during the booking stage of my ordeal. The ease that he had in adjusting to this society was evidence that he had accepted the inhumane treatment that started with a 3-day booking and racial tension as a natural part of gang life. Snoop positioned himself so that he had an unobstructed view of the yard. His posturing made it clear to anyone who might consider an attack that he wouldn't go down easy. I assumed the same state of alert as Snoop exchanged greetings with members of his blood crew. The greetings that were extended to Snoop were passed on to me. Having an audience with Snoop allowed me a view of the coordinated security squad that the brothers devised that was made up of both Bloods and Crips. To an onlooker, the actual topic of Snoop's conversation was hidden as he talked while pretending to be in the midst of a hip-hop recital. He lightly pounded his chest with a clenched fist, which served to create the baseline for his imaginary rap. His mask was complete as I caught on to his tactics by rocking my head back and forth to show that I enjoyed his lyrics. In place of the pimp culture that is often depicted in hip-hop lyrics, Snoop used his mask to make me aware of what was soon to unfold on the yard. With no immediacy to his voice and staying on beat, Snoop began to tell me who was about to be disciplined. Snoop said that the Southsiders were about to discipline one of their soldiers. On one end, their news to us was a sign of respect, and it also warned anyone not involved to secure their soldiers so that they wouldn't react, believing that one of their soldiers was at the bottom of the pack. He found it hilarious that everyone knew what was about to happen except the one due to get attacked. Snoop revealed that the Southsiders had a mission to take control over certain neighborhoods to monopolize the drug trade. Like most people not affected by this war that Snoop spoke of, I was shocked. Snoop emphasized that there was a full war with Southsiders underway in Los Angeles over the failed drug trades, and there was a power grab that always affected the innocent. After listening to the Chronicles of War, I realized that the part of town that is under prison mandate was less than 5 miles from my home. The 5 miles could have been 1,000 because in my neighborhood, I was unaffected by the street-level drug wars. We shared the same city in name only. I asked Snoop, what was the goal of these terrorists? In a tone that was dead to sentiment, Snoop carried on with what I can describe as a fairy tale, in that the Southsiders' goal were to take over California. Had there been a hint of jest, I would have laughed to break the heavy conversation, but there was none. As improbable as the notion may be, according to Snoop, they intended to take over California, or as he corrected himself, take back California. Had I engaged Snoop into further dialogue and presented a counter-argument to his understanding of the Southsiders' goal to take over California, it would have fallen on deaf ears. All he saw was the evidence on the ground in the form of gold chains and luxury cars. I knew that I was engaged in a society that had illusions of grandeur that were removed from reality. I quickly found it in my best interest to reserve judgment. Our conversation came to a close when two Southsiders unleashed a flurry of punches on the marked man. I followed Snoop's lead as he made his way to the far side of the yard where the brothers congregated. As we walked, I eyed the fence, flirting with the notion of an escape. My soul wanted out, but I knew better than to display any outward signs of that. The two attackers failed to put down the marked man with their initial shots. Surprisingly, he shook off their heavy blows and managed to remain upright. The officers looked on without any sense of immediacy. Just when the victim appeared to be able to handle the initial attack, two more soldiers joined the fight, and the marked man's defense was overtaken. Eventually, the cavalry arrived, with upward of 20 officers storming the yard, with their staff clubs in hand, screaming for everyone to lie face down on the ground. Snoop had the presence of mind to deliver a joke mocking the officers' arrival with a line that was all too appropriate. "The bulls are coming, the bulls are coming." We would lie face down for over an hour as the sheriff's investigative staff processed the crime scene, photographing and cataloging the assailants. The marked man appeared fully alert, so it was doubtful that he would succumb to his wounds. The sheriff's tactical team militaristic response to the incident should have been enough for Snoop to review his assessment of the Southsiders' goal of taking back California, as the sheriffs left little room for anyone to question who would remain in control if such an attempt were made. "Listen, the court gestures cap and bells. The king is coming." Civil Order, Chapter 4. Rushing to get to the visiting area, I realized that it would serve me well to lower my expectations of what would be provided in the way of comfort. I arrived at my booth where I saw Elle and my friend Frankie. Their glued on smiles were a sign that they had been briefed to remain cheerful upon receiving me. Elle couldn't hold her excitement much longer as she launched into conversation before I could place the phone to my ear. I wanted to tell her to pause, but she blinked and a stream of tears fell down her face. She didn't fight the emotion any longer, which allowed the release of a well that she had stored up. I could do nothing but watch. She eventually gained control and continued on, speaking quickly, her voice cracking as she worked to keep it together. "Hey, babe," was a comforting thing to hear. I would have been satisfied with hearing her say those words in a loop. Then I met her attempt at an embrace by placing my hands against the window. I knew at some point during the visit we would have to discuss the reason for our disgusting meeting, my confinement. She rambled on with updates and well wishes from friends. I allowed myself a moment of laughter as I observed the trinkets and scarves she wore, which seemed to be more poignant than practical. I took joy in imagining that she had worn all the items that I had ever given her just to please me. She fidgeted with her accessories like a nervous schoolgirl. Her sensuous fingers traced hearts in the glass as she spoke. Frankie sat behind her, not saying much, and eventually stepping away, affording us a bit of privacy. I gave in to a comfort and began to catalog 7 seconds of silence from Elle after I said, "I love you." I didn't know how much to reveal to Elle while using the prison phones that were being monitored. I didn't know how much to reveal to Elle while using the prison phones that were being monitored, and for the first half of the visit, I decided to allow Elle to drive the conversation. She would immediately deliver me to a memory of a passionate experience we shared. Elle found a clever way to inject laughter into the visit when she departed from the experience she was describing. She asked me if I had really been deprived of relations with the woman since my arrest. Her attempt at a joke was welcome, but it also got me to thinking if I would ever be allowed to enjoy another sexual memory with Elle or any woman, a concern I didn't dare voice. Elle had other plans. Even in deplorable conditions like the visiting room, natural urges refused to die. Elle had other plans. Even in deplorable conditions like the visiting room, natural urges refused to die. Her juvenile sex talk had caused my spirits to reconstitute itself, awakening in desires that until now were repressed. I didn't know where to focus my attention. Her soft skin, her full lips, or that talented mouth. How will I keep her? I have nothing to offer to satisfy her sexual desires. My conversation can only do so much. I listened as she reminded me of how pleased I had made her in the past, but that was the past. Elle worked herself down to 3 seconds of silence between my "I love you" and her jubilant proclamation of love for me. Frankie returned and Elle passed him the phone. Frankie returned and Elle passed him the phone. Slowly, he sat in the chair that occupied the space at the booth. Elle's appearance in the background was washed away by Frankie's commanding frame. He had comprehensive knowledge of my legal case, which allowed him to speak candidly, providing his opinion as to how he thought I should proceed. We were both aware by the recorded voice on the phone that constantly interrupted our conversation with the message, "All calls are monitored." Once Frankie and I had reached a roadblock in our talks, he stepped aside and allowed Elle to return to her seat in the glass booth. She was clearing new tears from her now flushed cheeks. In her attempt to present a supportive face, she delivered back-to-back one-liner jokes. Normally, I would find anything she said to be amusing, but at this moment, I could only contemplate the question that Frankie posed. Thankfully, the visit was coming to an end. Elle placed her hand on the glass, which fit into the outline of my open hand. That was the extent of our interaction we could share. Without any further protest, we ended the visit. If I stayed in this place much longer, I would surely lose her. As it stood, I was now a shell of my former self. My fragile health was evident. Pale face, prominent cheekbones, and my once lively eyes had receded, giving me the appearance of a starved hostage. My persistent cough was a part of my conversation with Elle, and it refused to die. Even in my lowest moments, I enjoyed the legion of shapely women who filed out of the visiting area. Several of them resembled the characters that filled the tattooed bodies of the gangsters. True to the characters that were displayed on the bodies were the women who wore one too many layers of makeup that accented their look. They appeared to take pride in achieving the proper arch to their intricately drawn-on eyebrows. 3 cholas, 1 newborn child, 5 prepubescent girls wearing clothes that a discerning mother would protest. The weekly pilgrimage for these ladies seemed like a part of life, almost easy, like it was a part of the deal when engaged to a criminal. Elle would never submit to this lifestyle.
So we're going to take some questions before Riley signs some books.
Why did you end up in prison?
In 2005, I was arrested for a crime that I had committed in 2004. I guess I was I committed the worst mistake that any criminal can make. I gave up my anonymity. So rest assured, my anonymity is gone. I'm of no threat to anyone here. But I was charged for a crime that I committed, which were, eventually I took a plea bargain for robbery, extortion. Initially, I was facing charges of kidnapping and extortion.
Next. Anyone? Yes, sir.
When did you write the book? When did you write it?
I actually started writing the book when I was incarcerated. I'd find any piece of paper I can find, cutouts from the magazine, anywhere where I can get some extra surface to write down. And once I was released in 2014, I organized my notes and then locked out a couple of days to myself. In 9 days, I wrote it out in longhand. And then I had to figure out Word 15.0 and type it up from there.
I got a question. Who will play you in the movie that will be made from this book?
Scotty Kahn. Or The Rock. Yes, who will play me? Scotty Kahn or The Rock's younger cousin?
Ma'am?
Beverly. Hi. So, what changes did you want to make in your life to sort of start fresh, and how did you get that process started?
I'll say this in all honesty. I was given a sentence of 10 years, 8 months, and I eventually served 9 years, 1 month, 4 days, 6 hours. But had I been given a lighter sentence, and had I come out at 2-year mark, I had a long list of revenges. So the first thing I did at about year number 3 is I really took assessment of my life and where I wanted to go, and that list got tossed aside. So that was the first thing. If I thought someone owed me, I had to forgive it. If not, I'd be constantly bringing myself back into this old life that I was living on a daily basis. So being honest with myself on where I want to go in life. If I wanted crime and everything that comes with it a part of my life, then I'd go back to what I think I knew best, what I wasn't that good at, I guess.
Couple more. Ma'am?
I've heard often the expression that a 40-year-old man lives with a 20-year-old boy's mistakes. I know firsthand, because I know you, that you are an amazing human being. But what can you tell this group here about the positive outlook and differences that you make in this world that are truly reflective of a man going forward?
Thank you, Dina. Being honest.
You know, you're
Repeat that last part.
What are you doing at this juncture going forward to be the man that you know that you are?
Every day living, what I'm doing going forward, every day living in order with what I see myself as, which is honest. That's the first thing. If you're not honest with yourself, we can always find ways to justify whatever behavior we want to carry out. So I'm always going to be honest with myself and first and foremost recognize that I'm the one that has to look in the mirror with myself, and is my behavior in line with what I say I am.
Sir? Yes?
Brian, what message, if any, would you say this book has for, say, the younger generation?
Thank you, Tony.
any message that might come out of my book is that I give you a brutal look at life, a daily life inside of prison. So any message that would come out of it is, if you think that you are bad, you think you're tough, you think you're slick, you lifted $5 out of your mom's purse. No bank robber I ever met started off robbing banks. So you're going to take those little moments and build on it. You're going to be successful in your crime, so you'll take the next step and go to a bigger crime. If you get caught, you'll make up the excuse. Oh, somebody told on me. Somebody said something. I can do it better next time. So if you think you're slick, at some point somebody else is slicker. Looking for someone in the audience. Don't know if he's here. But the detective who arrested me was supposed to come today. And in that, we had a conversation a week ago, and he reminded me how when I took my plea bargain, I asked my attorney if you could call the district attorney and the head detective over, I'd like to thank them. And they thought I was playing a joke on them. So when they came over, I shook their hands and I thanked them. And I said, I understand you had a job to do. You carried out your job with respect.
A couple more? Sir?
I just have a question. Can you let people just in a small way, let them know how powerful prisons are and how much they run the outside world?
How powerful prisons are. From a gang perspective, I assume you're referring to? They are interconnected. There's a straight through line from the inside to the outside. And the conversations flow as easy as our conversation is right now. So going into prison is just an extension of your street life, and you carried it on from there. Coming out, you're going to be doing whatever you were doing on the inside, you'll be doing it once you come out, if you so choose. So there's a free flow of information, there's a free flow of conversation that passes, and the institutions, the administration, the lawmakers have a tough job in figuring out how they're going to adjust what currently exists, because the current structure clearly has shown it's a failure. 40, 50 years of the same thing and the same results. It's clearly a failure.
Time for one more. Someone who wants to. Jeff?
At your darkest moment inside, did you ever see yourself being here?
From the day that I took my plea bargain, knowing that allowed me a future, I was hoping that at some point it would look like this.
Thank you all for coming. We're going to have, Riley's going to be signing books in the back in one moment. He's going to be signing books in the back, and there's some refreshments there, but he has a very important announcement to make before we go back there.
Well, I want to thank everyone that has come out, especially Jennifer. She's my editor in life, and every day there's red marks that go through. So, I thank you. I love you. Dana, Fred Leeds, and the Leeds clan that's here. Ivy, hello. The toughest guys in prison couldn't prepare me for 18-year-old Ivy. I love you. My buddies Peter, Alex, and Frankie. My buddies Alex and Frankie, who walked through hell with me. Eternally grateful. And my buddy Scotty. When I called him about 2 years into my sentence, he asked me, after he cussed me out, he asked me what I was working on, what I was writing. So over the next couple of years, I call him every 6 months, and he'd ask the same question. So when I came out and I finished the book that I wrote, I handed it off to him and said, this is what I was working on. And thankfully he got my material over to Tyson over at Rare Bird, And I thank him for taking a chance with this Neanderthal man right here. Guy, my editor, he found a way to pull out a little bit more than what I thought I had already given him. And the many friends and families, I know I'm going to miss somebody, but Scotty Shabu, right there. Tony, producing partner. Jen, I can thank Jen again. Thank you, and I love you. Joe, my man Joe, is around here somewhere. David Burstyn. All right.
Okay, thank you very much, and head over for some snacks. And